All right, is this thing on? Checking if this thing is on. I'm going to wait for people to join on here and then get started in a couple minutes. All right, as people are joining on here, if you want to make a comment in the stream and start asking questions, I'm going to answer questions basically for an hour. So feel free to start peppering in any questions you have. I'm going to start with a bunch of questions people already asked me prior to this. Let me go over to my little thing here. I've never figured out how to do Twitter streaming before, so this is the first time. And I'm coming to you live from my home office, which is also my bedroom. Here it is in all its glory. It's very nice. All right, so it seems like there's some people hopping on here. Got about 60 people. Cool. All right. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a chat about just a philosophy around designing remotely. First of all, I just want to acknowledge that nothing about right now is normal in any way. If you work for a company that wasn't previously remote and now you've been forced to become remote, you really just cannot possibly expect people to have anywhere near the same degree of productivity that they had before. Because people are not only adjusting to a completely new, different way of working, but they're also doing so under extreme anxiety and with other unanticipated life changes to go along with that. So I just kind of want to acknowledge that up front, that whatever I'm going to talk about today about designing remotely will be based on learned experience from having done this for about a decade. But even with that experience, this last few weeks has been nothing like those 10 years. It's messed up for everybody. So we have to cut everybody a lot of slack, no matter what their comfort level is with remote work. Hey, everybody, I'm going to post comments. Hello. Cool, this thing works. So yeah, so with that said, everything's messed up. And with things being messed up, there's also maybe, we'll see, maybe there's a positive side to this in the end, where being forced to work in a different way could be weirdly enlightening for the future. When we're able to return to some degree of normalcy and make decisions for ourselves again and leave the house. Maybe some people will have discovered that they liked aspects of working remotely, working at home, and want to do more of that. So what I'm going to focus on questions for today is general practices considering less unusual times, and techniques and tricks that can help you be successful with remote design work, whether it's for now during our anxious times or preferably in calmer times. So our general approach, usually, but even more so now, is to do things asynchronous as much as possible. So less demand for real-time interaction with people. It's especially important right now with people being at home with their kids or isolated in their apartment, whatever it is. Everybody's needing to have buffer time to figure out their life and deal with their situations. So you kind of can't reliably expect people to be on a computer at 3:45 p.m. necessarily. They're just like, it's too hard right now. So one key thing is just try to reduce synchronous communication as much as possible and try to increase asynchronous. What I mean by that is if you can write something up instead of having it in a chat, if you have a place to do that, write it up. If you can track work in a system like Basecamp or like Trello or whatever, do it there instead of needing to get somebody on the phone or needing to have a video call with them, whatever. Really reduce the amount of time you're needing people to be interacting in high fidelity. We've been doing that at Basecamp, traditionally, we were doing more video calling, and then within the last 2 weeks, I basically kind of shut that down for a while because it was like, everybody needs time. We might spin some things back up again now that people are getting more used to what's going on, but we'll see how that goes. So let me start answering some questions. And as I go, if you have questions or comments or anything you want to send to me, go ahead and post those up. I'm going to be checking tweets, and I'm going to be checking in this stream thing to see if there's any comments. So feel free to keep peppering questions as I go along here. The first one, a bunch of people asked me questions prior to me starting the stream, so I'm going to go through those one by one. And then when I'm done with those, if there are more, I'll keep going. Otherwise, we'll just call it off at that point. So the first question I got was from Hamza on Twitter. And he asked, I'm planning on doing design thinking sessions for my company, and I'm thinking of ways to create teams so that they can work on ideas together. I'm deliberating on how to channel the teamwork aspect in a virtual call with about 20 to 30 people. And there's a thing I think a lot of people are probably facing right now, where if you used to work in an office or you used to work in group situations, you could congregate a lot of people together and like work as a big group and have a discussion. And when you're person to person, that's relatively easy to do because there's like a social construct. Everybody can see everyone. It's friendly. You can raise your hand. You can like have a snack, whatever. When you switch to remote tools, having that quantity of people on a video call is really awkward. like basically there's like an inverse relationship to the number of people on a call and how good the call is. So if you scale up a video call to 20 or 30 people, it's just not going to be very pleasant. It basically, what happens is no one really talks. Everyone has to mute because there's too many people. And so if people like start talking, they talk over each other, and everybody has kids in the background and there's like noise. So everybody's muted. And then one person talks at a time. And there's usually like awkward silences because nobody wants to unmute the call to talk. It's just bad. So what I found works better is if you have to have a like high fidelity call with that number of people, make it mostly a presentation, not like an interaction thing. So maybe you want to present an idea to a group, you could do that, but don't expect a lot of like back and forth collaboration on it. And then if you do need to do back and forth collaboration, break that out into smaller calls. So Zoom, if you use Zoom, Zoom has a feature where you can break out like smaller groups as part of a big call. So you could schedule one big call, invite everybody to that, and then say, okay, now I want all of you to work together in small groups, and then break people out into little like team rooms. They're like fake rooms. And then you can like bring people back and forth into little groups, and it works a little better. So my suggestion is, to the extent possible, always keep video calls to the fewest number of participants you can. If you need to have more calls, then just do that, because it's just 20 or 30 people is just not fun. It's kind of just painful. So then my next question is from Jason Grant on Twitter. He asked, what tools do you use to replace whiteboarding and Post-it sessions? Now, we don't do a lot of Post-it stuff. In fact, we don't really do any Post-it stuff. There are tools for that. I've seen people use apps where you can make like a Post-it board and then share it with other people. I can't recommend them because I don't use them, so I don't have a lot of experience with that. However, whiteboarding is something we do a lot. In fact, I tend to get together with Jason Fried, our CEO in Chicago, like usually once a week. We get together and like draw stuff. For us, it's chalkboarding. It's not whiteboarding because we have chalkboards. We get together and just draw things on the chalkboard, and we review what's going on. And since this lockdown thing has happened, we can't see each other. So we basically just haven't done that. But there are ways to reproduce that experience remotely that work pretty well. And the way I like to do it is using an app called Reflector that works with iOS and the Mac. So I'm going to demo it if I can make this work. So bear with me. So I'm going to share my screen here. Let me get my thing. All right, that is my iPad. So I'm going to switch to this mode. Now, this is, as you can see, this is my iPad here. And I've got it hooked up through Reflector to my Mac, and then I'm sharing my Mac screen to you. So that's how you're seeing this. So it's this like many degrees of sharing thing. But so it mirrors the iPad. So I can go into, I use GoodNotes. You can open that app, and then it basically just gives you a big blank page, and you can just sketch as if you were standing at the whiteboard with someone. So I'll just, if we were drawing a UI, I might do something like this. Like, I'm going to work on this menu. How should we do it? Maybe we've got like something here, and then you can zoom in or whatever. So this is a really good way, high fidelity way to sort of reproduce that like whiteboard experience where you're not actually sitting around the same whiteboard, but you can see what a person is sketching and comment on it and move things around. So that would be my recommendation for replacing whiteboarding. Let me get off this screen share thing. Now, Jason had also asked, how do you balance interaction time with heads down time? And I think that kind of goes back to what I was talking about originally at the beginning, which is just basically reducing interaction time to the minimum necessary. And what that means, it varies depending on what your company is like. So if you feel like you need to talk with your team very frequently, maybe try to reduce the frequency by one step. So if usually you were talking to everybody every day, try to tamp that down to maybe twice a week or something for now, in order to let everybody breathe and have some space. And then get back together, save those meetings up, and then get back together and have like a rich, longer session, or maybe you do this whiteboarding stuff or whatever. That would be my recommendation for now, is more heads down time, less interaction time for the moment. Okay, so that was Jason's questions. Let me go to the next one here. I'm gonna just check my Twitter real fast. Oh, somebody asked about a recording. I will have a recording for this. I think it's being recorded right now. So whenever this is done, I will retweet it with the link so you can see that. All right, hop back in here. Cool, all right. So then I had a question from Aaron on Twitter, and he asked, I watched Jason's demo yesterday. Jason Fried and David Hennemeyer Hansen did a demo of Basecamp yesterday. They live streamed and like walked through our account and showed people how to use it. So you watch Jason's demo, and it seems like most communications that we do as a company run through Basecamp, as opposed to having calls or video chats. When you do it that way, how do you communicate the intricacies of your designs to engineers? And do you have a particular workflow that you can elaborate on? So this is a really good question. I think we talk a lot about how we shape and scope projects. We don't talk as much about how we actually execute the projects as designers and programmers when we're in there. So once a project is shaped and it gets assigned to a team, how do we actually do that? So as I've been saying repeatedly, we obviously prefer asynchronous communication. I've been working with one of our programmers who lives in Copenhagen. So there's a relatively substantial time difference there. And you kind of have no choice but to be more asynchronous then, because you just can't count on somebody being around. So our general day-to-day life between designer and developer is mostly asynchronous write-ups and some real-time chat. So very occasionally, like really occasionally, we will hop on a video call. But that tends to only happen either at the start of a project, when we're first kind of figuring things out and like getting the lay of the land and like deciding what to do, or sometimes in the middle of a project if we run into issues that are like so difficult that we can't work it out with text. Like it's like, I'm stuck, we need to get on a call, something higher bandwidth to figure this out. We will then have a call. But generally, we're almost always text-based for 95% of the time. So the way that works is we mostly are tracking our work in Basecamp in to-dos. And to-dos all have comments. So there might be a to-do that's like, wire up this part of an interface for a programmer to do. And so I'll design the interface, take a screenshot of it, probably commit the code, the UI code in a branch in GitHub, post that, and then I would comment in the to-do and say, hey, Casper, I'm ready for you to hook up this part of this interface. Here's how it looks. Here's a link to the code. Let's talk about it if you get stuck. And then typically we would either go back and forth in the comments if there were problems, or we might hop into a ping or a chat to discuss it in higher fidelity. So let me, I'm going to go back into screen sharing again and see if I can show you an actual project. Let's see here. All right, let me switch to this. How do I get out of here? Sorry. Okay, here we go. Share this. Okay, cool. So this is a project I'm currently, right now, at the moment, working on with Casper, who's our programmer in Denmark. And we're working on our new email app, Hey. And we're working on kind of regular detail of it, which is that people need to be able to import contacts into it. So if it's an email app, you want to be able to get some email addresses into it. That's what we're building. I just wanted to show you a little taste of what the project looks like. So if you, let me go back over here. Let me just go scroll down here. You can kind of see how much discussions we're having. There's some little screenshots. Here's the kind of discussions we're having. These are mostly on to-dos. We ran QA. So you can get a sense of like how much text conversation we're having. It's really mostly text conversation, but all in little nuggets related to specific pieces of work. So it's not like we're doing like big, long messages back and forth to each other every day. It's mostly like little comments here and there. Hey, did you take a look at this? Hey, what's going on with this? Finish that one, you know? And then let me go to the to-dos here. And you can kind of see, so we're kind of at the end of this project. So we have this hill chart that shows our progress, and most of our progress is kind of done because we're getting to the end. But if you scroll back, you can see we had scoped out to-do lists for each little piece of work. And then they tend to be, you know, I designed the screen and then Casper hooked it up. And then, you know, more stuff like that. Then we did a round of QA testing and found a bunch of like bugs and problems with it. So we made to-dos for each one of those. And some of these have a lot of comments. This has 4 comments on it. There's like 6 comments here because we're still figuring this out. And that's kind of it. So that's like the main way we keep in touch with each other, really. And then when we need to chat, we chat just randomly, whenever. Sometimes it's just friendlier to chat than it is to drop a comment in. So there's not like a rule to when you use one or the other. But I tend to, especially with Casper, I try to do asynchronous a little more than maybe I would with somebody who was at least in my time zone, because I don't know what his schedule is like. He's like 6 or 7 hours ahead. So I don't want to like send him a chat and wake him up. So I'd rather just like make a comment, and then when he's available, he can get to it. So that's a little taste of what our day-to-day design is like working with a programmer. Let me go back over here. So and the other part I left out of that was we also do a fair bit of stuff in GitHub. So we'll commit code with each other. I'll make a pull request that might be like a spiked out interface that doesn't actually work. It's just like a stub. And then Casper might take that and make the stub into a working thing. Or maybe I get part of it to work, but he has to do the back end. So I'll give him the part that works. Sometimes the programmer will actually start if the designer's not available yet. So he might spin up some tech with like a skeletal interface, and then I'll take that in Rails and then build something on top of it. Okay, so that's basically it. That's a quick snapshot. Happy to take more questions on that if anybody has more questions. Let's see here. I'm just checking my Twitter here. All right. So next question is, do you use, this is from Brad and Alan on Twitter. They both kind of asked about this same thing in different ways. Do you use version control tools for designs like Abstract, for example? We don't really, and part of that is we're perhaps a little fortunate in that most of our designers work kind of independently with programmers on separate teams. So we're generally not on top of each other when it comes to design assets, very much. Sometimes there's some overlap. We might have a couple designers. Maybe we have like a mobile team and a web team kind of working on the same thing at the same time, and we kind of have to go back and forth more. But generally, it's kind of like everybody's doing separate work, so we don't have to fight about versioning and like, especially like on a day-to-day basis. Like if you're a team that heavily uses sketch files or something, that's like your main output. A lot of people need to be in the same sketch files all the time, and so it's like it becomes more of a problem. For us, we don't really work that way. We're mostly in code, so the vast majority of our version control just lives in GitHub. We do have a shared Basecamp project, which I can show, I think, and go to it real quick. Yeah, I'll show this part. Let me turn this off. Sorry, the screen sharing is a little clunky here. Okay, so we have a designers team in our Basecamp 3 account where we keep a lot of like shared assets that any of us might need. So you can kind of see what's in here. There's like logos, fonts. We have some color palette things. There's like icon libraries that we use for the apps, various like illustrations and things we might use, print materials. So anything where like some other designer might need to share that asset, we try to put in here. And we've also been working on a designer handbook for people at the company who need to do some light interface design, kind of, writing down what we do, what our rules are, how we work, what our style is, how we write CSS, things like that. So we do have like those kind of basic structural things in place in case we need to share things, but in general, we don't need to do full version control. Let me stop that for a sec here. Okay. So in addition to that, I would say if you're a design manager or you're leading a team, and you're considering like maybe I need version controlling for all these assets or whatever, I would also encourage taking a step back from the problem and think about if there are ways that you can decouple dependencies between teams so that they don't need to be on top of each other worrying about day-to-day version control of assets. Maybe you need to. It could be that you're at a scale where like that's just the way you work and you have a million files getting produced and there's output coming all the time. If that's the case, then sure, you're going to need a thing. But I generally think it's healthy to ask, like, is there something we could just not do to not need to have this complexity, rather than adding software tooling and steps to people's work process in order to manage these things? So part of that might be staggering projects so that people aren't on top of each other as much. Or it might be reducing the team size, have more teams with fewer people so that you don't need as many versions. You're not having to track communication across a large team. You can make a smaller team. Those are just a few ideas. But I think that's always worth, like if you're in a situation where you're like, man, I think I need to buy software to solve this problem. I always think it's good to step back and be like, do I though really need to buy software? Would there be a way to not? So we may do with like 6 designers and no version control, and we support somewhere around a dozen apps and 100,000 customers. So like it can be done. Not all companies will work like us, obviously, but it's just a encouragement to like if you feel like you're struggling with this and it's like a problem and it's reducing your productivity or something, give it a shot. Maybe try a different way of working. All right, I'm going to move on to the next one. The next question is from Joshua on Twitter. And he asks, in the meeting-averse culture of Basecamp, how does design work get reviewed, feedbacked, and approved? So yeah, okay, so I just talked about we're meeting-averse and asynchronous and whatever. Part of the way we avoid needing to be in contact with each other a lot is having thoughtfully shaped projects assigned to teams at the outset before we even start working. So when you do that, you reduce a lot of the uncertainty around the project because everybody at the beginning has a pretty clear outline for what's supposed to get built, how long it ought to take, what's within the boundaries of the scope and what's not, what it might look like, what parts are going to get affected in the software. When you do that, that automatically reduces a huge amount of feedback and meetings you need to have because you're not having all these meetings just figuring things out. You might end up, if you don't do that, you might end up spending 2 or 3 weeks just like constantly talking to each other, being like, wait, is this interface good? What about this interface? Who did anybody do research on this? What do you think? So we just don't have that at all. We just don't do it. Which means then at that point, the work you're doing is more precise, and it can be, the feedback is very specific. It's like the first thing you might do if you're a designer working here is you get a project assigned to you and you get a shaping document. And let me show you a shaping document real quick. Go back over here again. Here is a shaping document that Jason wrote. So this is a document where we're doing a project for the new Hey app, where there's a view where you can see the files that people have sent you. And this is the way that Jason shaped it up. So he basically described the feature, listed the appetite, which is how long it ought to take, 3 weeks, and then included some details, including a rough interface sketch. So this is like the degree of detail you might have. Now, this is a pretty straight shot project. It's like one screen. There's, some fiddly interface stuff in here with like how you show files. The hardest part of it probably is showing thumbnails of files properly sized and supporting a bunch of different file types and showing those or whatever. But it's a relatively like confined project. It doesn't like scope across all of the product or include lots of unknown complexities or whatever. So that's it. So Jason would post this, and then I can scroll down a little. Here's some list. And that's it. So he posts a shaping document, and then we kind of go at it. So we'll start at day 1, and we'll probably spike out a rough looking UI that's like somewhat close to that sketch that Jason had sketched up. And then we probably at that point will share it with Jason, be like, hey, here's the first stab at this. What do you think? Is this close? How do you feel about that? And then he might have some feedback. Sometimes we'll share it amongst ourselves, amongst the team, depending on what it is. Sometimes Jason's not available, so people might run it by me, or we might just share it with the group and just say, hey, here's a UI I'm working on. A lot of times the designers will share their work in progress in their daily check-ins. We would tend to write up every day, we write up what we did. And a lot of times we'll just take a screenshot and post it in there and people will comment. So that's kind of how we do feedback. It's very ad hoc. It's not like on a super timed schedule. It's more like when you feel you've made enough progress on something that it warrants a check-in, you just hit up the person who has a stake in it, which is usually Jason, but not always. So that's kind of how that goes. Let's see. Oh, and then, okay, so there's a couple other times we do reviews. So throughout the project, it's kind of ad hoc, like I just showed. But then at the end, we get a little more formal. So usually like a couple of weeks before we're wrapping up, we'll do a formal round of QA on the like possibly shipping version. So that's like a full review. Our QA person is Michael, and he's very thorough. So he'll go through and find every possible bug. He works with some contract people who also find bugs. And he's cool too, because he kind of takes a more like a higher level approach to QA, where like he'll find things that just maybe aren't bugs, but also aren't clear or aren't understandable, and he'll call those out. So it's sort of like a last chance for review for someone who's coming to the project cold. They'll use it and be like, hey, I don't understand this. this interface doesn't make sense to me. So that's a good kind of final review moment as well. And then also at the end of a project, we usually do a thorough code review. The programmers will do that. And then sometimes, depending on what it is, we'll do a review amongst the designers as well. Particularly when we were first starting up this new app, we did a lot of conversations about how we structure CSS, what kind of like system level classes we have, how we do utility classes, how the basic like layout is marked up. Things like that came up early because we were figuring everything out. Everything was still rough. We also came up with a new way to do colors in the app that we'd never done before. So it supports dark mode and light mode. And then we had to figure out how to like invert icon colors without driving ourselves crazy doing that. So lots of that like systemic ground level stuff the designers will get in touch with each other and talk about, but we tend not to review shipping features in too much detail unless there's like known potential problems across teams. Like if I'm doing something that could really affect the mobile apps, I'll hit up our mobile designers and talk to them about that. That's pretty much it. I think that's our general feedback approach for now. Let me go on to some questions in the stream here. It says, so do you guys use any design tool? This is Renato. Do you guys use any design tool, or do you still design in the browser? We all use different things, I think. It depends on what you're doing. So mostly, I think our web team is primarily writing front-end code. They're doing HTML, CSS, JavaScript, some Rails. But that's not necessarily the only place you're designing. We're also probably working in Sketch or Figma or Illustrator to design assets or visual elements. We're usually sketching, like I just showed in GoodNotes or whatever. Usually writing copy, which is not you don't really need a design tool for that, but like Notepad is kind of a design tool in a way for us. So I think we're kind of just all over. We use whatever tool and scenario we need to get something done. And it varies depending on the project. Some projects don't need any illustrations. They don't need sketch work. Some projects need a lot of that. It just depends on what you're doing. So we try to just kind of be flexible and not get stuck into a corner on one thing or another. Let's see here. Some other questions. Okay, so related. Is it required for a designer at Basecamp to know how to code? Yes, it is, I think. We've played around with that in different ways with different employees and over the years. We generally want someone to come in with a basic amount of knowledge about HTML and CSS at a minimum. And the reason for that is we're a tiny team. There's only 6 of us total. And we all are pretty independent, and we need to be able to pretty much build our own interfaces. That's just the way we like to work. It makes us a little more productive. It makes it easier for us to go back and forth with programmers. So it's just a little tricky for somebody who doesn't have that skill set to walk in and be able to ship stuff, because that's just like our traditional process. However, that's not, so that's like a higher bar than not knowing any implementation code, but it's not so high that you couldn't come in and learn stuff. So like when I joined, I didn't know Rails. I'd never used it. Now I know it well enough, I can spin up an app on my own, probably. Maybe not great. it won't be like a beautifully designed functioning app, but I can make an app work in Rails relatively easily. Similar to with JavaScript too. You might not know any JavaScript, you might know a little. That's fine. You can learn that. But so the key is, I think the fundamental thing is really being able to spike out a working like web interface. Seems like it's like the minimum requirement we would have to hire someone. Let's see here. Oh, somebody asked, will this video go on YouTube? It will. This will be recorded. I'll share the link afterwards. Let's see here. I'm going to pop over to Twitter and see if there's any other questions people have. If you have a question, feel free to pop it in the feed right now. Let's see. I think somebody has a Basecamp question. Why can't you add the quote option in the comments on to-dos? I thought we had that. I don't know. Let me check. I'm going to see this. I should find out. comments. I'm pretty sure there's a quote option. I don't know. I might not understand that question. If that's a Basecamp question, hit me up afterwards after this, and we can talk about it. Okay, here's a question. Somebody said, how many designers do we have at Basecamp? So right now we have 3 designers who work on our core product team, which is basically the web and desktop. Our desktop stuff is kind of also web-based. Oops, I lost my AirPod. Pod is back. So yeah, we have 3 designers, including myself, who are on the core product team, and we mostly do desktop and web stuff. We have 2 designers, 1 each, that work on our mobile apps. So we have 1 designer on iOS and 1 on Android. And then we have 1 designer who does our marketing work. And that's it. So there's 6 of us total, 3 on the core product, and then 1 on each one of those like smaller teams. And that's it for now. We've, over the years, gone up and down a little bit on that, but we've stayed pretty consistently sized for quite a while. Let's see here. Just looking for other questions. I think that's all we have for questions at the moment, unless I'm missing them. Let's see here. Oh, okay. Here's a question that just came in. Can you please elaborate a little about the daily logging you talked about, like posting work in progress? Absolutely, yes. Let me show you that. Dig up my Basecamp account here. Just give me 1 second to get there. Sorry. Okay, yeah, let me share a screen here. So a minute ago, I was talking about Casper and I are working on this contact importing project. We recently internally released the first version of that, and then our mobile teams, who are led by Connor and Jamie, they're the designers on the mobile teams, they kind of got the first version that we did on the web, and then they get to take a look at it and see like, hey, how does this work on mobile? Is there something else we need to do to enhance it to make it work nicer on the phone? So Connor last night started peeking at it and did a little bit of a refinement. So this is like a bit of a tease for this app. You can see here, this is our daily check-in thing. And Connor took the interface on the left, which was our contact screen, and then refined it a little bit and posted his refinement in his check-in. And then down there's some people commented like, oh, it looks nice. I like it. Cool. So that's a good example of like our super simple ad hoc way of reporting progress from design day to day. The way that thing works is it's an automatic check-in that Basecamp does. It's a feature of Basecamp 3. And automatic check-ins are basically scheduled questions. So every day, the system asks you, what did you work on today? And it's kind of optional. We don't have to answer it every single day. But if you have something interesting that you worked on, you can write it up and share it with the company. And everybody at the company can see it. So it's a cool way to share work in progress without needing to interrupt people. Like that was an example, like Connor made like a tweak. It doesn't meaningfully change the feature really. The feature is the same, has the same UI elements. It just moves some things around a little bit, made it a little more refined. So that's not the kind of thing that you necessarily need to like interrupt someone during their workday to show. Like I wouldn't necessarily want to hit up, our CEO and be like, hey, I changed this add button. Like, look, right? Like it's too invasive. So the daily check-in is a cool spot to do that kind of thing, where it's like, here's a little thing I'm doing. It's not high criticality. It's okay if nobody even really sees this. If they do, it's fine. Just sharing what I'm doing. And then people can kind of passively keep an eye and look. So that's kind of one of the many ways we keep in touch. And yes, that's with Basecamp 3. Let me go back. I can show you the actual thing. If I scroll up here, this is what have you worked on. And so this is we have a special project called What Works, and it has some questions in here like this. It's really just these two: what have you worked on, which is like a report, like what have you done lately? And then what will you be working on this week, which goes out on Mondays. Um, and that's really all we do in terms of like status updates with each other. So on Mondays, everybody kind of writes up a few ideas for what they think they're going to get done. And then roughly day to day, although most people are not reporting every single day, we write up what we worked on for the day or the past 2 days, something like that. And that's really it. But the cool thing is everybody uses these questions and answers in different ways. Some people love to write up long, methodical journals of what they've been doing. Other people have 3 bullet points or a sentence, and that's it. So it just varies. It depends on how comfortable you are sharing. Okay, I have another question here. It says, I'm interested in the dynamic between designers and product managers at Basecamp, or maybe project managers. Do you do project management yourself using tools like Jira or Trello? Yeah, we don't have dedicated project managers at the company. We have people who sort of fill that role, and that's also a thing that's sort of project to project. Whoever is like the lead person. Jason Fried, I would say, is like the product owner, where he kind of makes the final call. So like, if there's a debate or there's an interface that's unclear or a project that's been going that maybe isn't going well, ultimately it falls to Jason to decide like, is this going to go in the product or not? So he's kind of in that role. Beyond that, we're all relatively independent in our ability to make decisions and run projects. So we don't use any other tooling for project management other than Basecamp, since that's what we do. Basecamp is our place for that. And the designer on the teams is typically the person who kind of does more of the project management, but not always. It depends. Sometimes there's a programmer who's very adept at that, or someone who's on the team who's a little bit more like up on the to-dos kind of thing. So whoever's the person who's most excited about doing it or most comfortable with it tends to manage the project a little bit, keep an eye on it, keep the to-dos cleaned up, keep an eye on what the schedule is like. A lot of times on Mondays, we'll kind of reassess where we're at, be like, hey, we're doing a 4-week project. We're on week 3 now. Are we close? Like, are we way off? Did we underestimate the time we're going to need for this? Are we, in the ballpark of being able to get it done? So we're kind of constantly asking ourselves those questions throughout a project. And like I showed before on this one, the hill chart is really our clearest sense of like where things are at. Like I can go back and show some previous versions here. Earlier in this project, this is another place where we kind of report progress. Every time we make some improvements, we kind of go in here and update this chart. So here we made progress on some of these bits, and then we kind of manually move these little dots around to give us a sense of like how done they are. So you can kind of follow back the experience in this project and see how we manage it. And this is just me and Casper. There's nobody else in here managing this for us or constantly pinging us like, where are you at? Is it done? What's going on next? There's like, nobody's doing that. We're just doing this as we work. We go in, and it's not every day. Maybe it's every other day, every few days. We go in and update things, and that way you can kind of play back a project, which is really good for people like Jason Fried as the product owner. He's got a million things going on. He doesn't have time to be looking at the nitty gritty of every single to-do that Casper and I are working on, but he does want to know where are we at. So if he shows up to the project and he hasn't heard from us in a week and he's like, what's going on? He can at least go here and kind of browse back the hill chart and get a sense of like what progress has been made. And he might look and be like, hey, why isn't delete moved? Like, it's been sitting here for a long time. It never moved. What's up? Like, you might ask that question. So it's a very organic, individualized way of doing project management that isn't so much about like stand-up meetings or constant check-ins or things like that. And this feature kind of enables that a lot more. Prior to when we had hill charts, it was much harder to get a sense of where the project stands because all you would see was 15 to-dos spread across 4 lists, and that doesn't mean anything in terms of the time. Like one of those to-dos could take 3 weeks and one could take a day. You don't know. So with the chart thing, it gives us a way to sort of communicate how far away something is from being done, which is really handy. Had a question here. I've read some of your project shaping ideas at a high level. Is that what informs the hill chart? Not really. The hill chart is sort of separate from shaping. The hill chart is kind of like the shaping document is like the input to a project, and the hill chart is kind of the output. So when a project gets shaped, it sort of gets loosely defined, and then the hill chart represents our progress in getting done with what the shaping document defined. And the middle piece of that, so if the hill chart is kind of the end and the shaping document is the beginning, the middle part is that we have to break up the shaping document into these little scopes. So as you can see here in this shared screen, we've got dots for each one of these bits. So like editing a contact is a bit, and adding a contact is like a scope. Let me go to the actual list so you can see. There's a list here. So this is like one of the first things we did was like, you need to be able to edit a contact in this app, which is pretty straightforward. It's like design a screen and then hook up the screen, right? That's like, those are the two to-dos. But we consider that to be a scope. So basically, once those to-dos are completed in that list, it means that you can then go into the app and edit a contact and save it, and it will work. And that's how we call it done. So that's how we kind of connect the dots from the shaping document. So the shaping document would have been like, we're going to need contacts, and you should be able to add them and edit them and delete them. It'll be like, okay, so we made each one of those a separate scope because they're separate parts. And then we track those on that chart. And then when they're done, they're at the end. So that's pretty much how it's set up. I can show you how the chart thing works. It's totally just up to us where something stands. So if today I work on delete a little bit, I'll just move this up. I'll be like, oh, I made some progress on it. I might be like, made some progress on contact delete, which I actually did. I worked on this yesterday. So this is legit. So I'll drag it there, and maybe it's not done. It's like still figuring it out, but I made some progress. I'll save, and now I have a new version of the hill with that update on the list there. And that's it. So our day-to-day work is like figuring out the right scopes, making to-dos for the various detailed bits, checking those off, communicating about those, and then kind of at the end of the day, updating the hill chart with whatever progress we made. Cool. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, somebody's asking if it's a manual process. It is manual, and that's actually the secret sauce of it, is that it's manual. So if you tried to make a hill chart that was based on like to-do completions or some metric, some computerized metric, it doesn't work. It doesn't communicate what we want here, which is what we're communicating is a human feeling. We're not communicating a stat, because a stat is like, I completed 10 to-dos today, but that does not tell you how far you are from being done. It only tells you how many to-dos you completed. So they're different things. You could theoretically try to communicate that by like adding metadata to to-dos that are like, this to-do represents 2 weeks of work. So when this to-do is completed, we're 2 weeks in, but I don't know, it doesn't work. So that's why this is a manual process intentionally. Let's see here. Okay, I have another question. I'm going to do one more, and then I think I'm going to end the chat for now. One person asked, how do you balance between designer and manager roles? Not sure I totally understand what you're asking there. I think basically I think you're asking like, how do you do both design and project management together, I think. Part of it is that it's a natural pairing for us, where in order to get the design work done, you kind of have to have a picture in your head about where it fits within the larger context of the overall project, what other parts you need to do next, what parts aren't done yet. So the way I see it is that it's like they're all the same. I actually don't even think of them as being separate parts. It's like if I'm going to design something and I'm working with another person, I need to communicate everything I'm doing. I need to have everything sorted out for like what needs to get done, and then I just need to work through it day by day. So I kind of see the project management aspect of it as just the means to an end. It's just a way to get design accomplished without a lot of confusion. That's really it. And everybody has different styles. So some people are more detailed in their to-dos. They might make more to-dos. They might have many more dots on the hill than I would. It's like you get a lot of subjectivity around how to organize, how closely to break things up. But that's kind of the nice part about this system is it doesn't need to be very heavy-handed. You can kind of adopt it the way that you feel comfortable. And someone's asking, does the hill chart come out of the box in Basecamp? It does. It's a little bit buried though. Let me show you. If you use Basecamp, I'll show you how to use it. If I add a new list on here, I can go on here and say, track this on the hill chart. And that's how I get one of these dots. So if I don't do that, the list will not be on the chart, which is kind of good. It's a little bit buried, so people sometimes don't know the chart thing exists because it's kind of hidden away there. But the good thing is if you don't want the chart, you don't have to have it. You can just track to-dos. And a lot of times we have multiple lists on a project, some of which need to be tracked and some don't. Like we don't generally track QA on the hill because it's just not a thing that we really need to like be fully done with. It tends to be like 20 to-dos and maybe we get 10 of them done and it's done. So it doesn't need to be tracked at that same level of fidelity. But okay, well, I think coming up on an hour here, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this session. Thank you all for attending and sending cool questions. This was great, and we'll try to do more of these. I don't know if people have other topics they'd like to hear or more of this, whatever. If you have other questions, hit me up, and then maybe we'll do another one in a couple of weeks. So cool, y'all. Thanks for attending. See you soon.